Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Startup Central right here on ET Now with me, Samita Karir. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be taking you through the top stories that we're tracking from the world of startups and entrepreneurship. In fact, on the show today, we have two very big interviews lined up ahead of the budget. India's startup ecosystem, as we all know, is at crossroads. Global disruptions, AI and deep tech are reshaping the landscape, while domestic capital and policy reforms are redefining growth. Joining us today is Ronnie Screwvala. He's the CEO and co-founder of Upgrad. He's also an investor and film producer. He shares his expectations from the finance ministry, why skilling and rural empowerment must be priorities, and how can India move 600 million people to higher livelihoods. Thank you very much, Ronnie, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. We're talking to at a time when there is global disruptions happening, there is AI-led disruptions happening, and of course, deep tech. That is reshaping the landscape. First things first, before we delve into the other things that we want to talk to you about, the upcoming budget, what are your key expectations?
You know, I think when we're heading towards a Viksit Bharat, I think each budget is a stepping stone. I think we should lower our expectations of it being a grand one. I think it needs to be stepping stone. I think we're in a good place. I think the world is in a rocky place. And I think we've behaved in a very mature manner. So we need to take the environmental part into a union budget today. Today, it's not in isolation. India can't. So I think the first one is very looking at the environmental part. Second, we have to maintain our growth because there's no question about the fact that we are the fastest growing economy in the world. And that track record we need to do while the world is correcting itself and trying to over leverage themselves elsewhere. I think the government obviously will first focus on this whole balance of the 600 million people that really need to get into what I would call a higher level of livelihood. So I think that is going to be a continued process because we really can't move the GDP unless the spending power goes up. For me, I think the key part here is the single focus needs to be what does India need to offer to the world and how are we training ourselves up for that? And I think at the epicenter for us is also a bit of the skilling mantra, which over the last 2-3 years has actually gathered momentum. Startup India and the entrepreneurship ecosystem, the small and medium scale sector and industry. So I would say between these three, that focus is going to change it. And then the rural empowerment. I think these are the two ones which I see are going to move the needle gently but steadily over the next 10 years.
Right, Ronnie. So you essentially have three key asks of the finance minister, but let's also talk about one of the things that you mentioned. You have been rather vocal in the past about the industry's expectations on skilling being a one issue. In fact, there was a Prime Minister's, the PM internship scheme as well to aid those looking to get into a formal workforce. That kind of support was there as well. But is that going to be enough, especially as far as skilling is concerned? Because India is now focusing on AI, on deep tech, on defense tech in a very, very big fashion. And of course, these are all segments that require specialized skilling.
No, I think India needs to focus on what do we have to offer. We have to offer much more skilled people. And I'm not talking about skilled labor so that somebody can just look at this as a manufacturing hub, which is definitely important. But what does India have to offer? So we have to be able to leapfrog and get upskilled because I don't think it's easy for us to be an AI capital of the world. We could be a market for it, but we're not monetizing it. So I think really the focus over the next 5 years to upskill everyone at different starters. Not everyone can start getting skilled in AI. Not everything is going to get displaced by AI. How are we going to create self-entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in a very different manner? So I think what India has to offer for the next 5 years is going to be much higher intellect in terms of capital, not just arbitrage capital. And I think therefore at every single level we have to raise that. That's one part. I think when you look at the sort of rural market, we have to raise aspirations even more. See, I think the fascinating and the great part is that we've lifted people, lots of people out of poverty, primarily because there's a lot of grants that go and the money reaches them directly. And that's changed people's lives. But it also gives them a sense of entitlement. So we need to move from entitlement to aspiration and ambition for a country to really. And I think the soft factors of that and the leverage comes from a union budget.
Absolutely. That's a very pertinent point. Now, Ronnie, India's startup ecosystem is the world's third largest, and the government has been talking about making it the top, the biggest ecosystem in the world, and of course manufacturing not just in India but making for the world as well. So if we indeed have to take grassroots entrepreneurship to grassroots, we do have to focus on some specific policies to sort of give a further push to ensure that penetration. While there are state-level policies that have been introduced in the recent past, what more can the central government look at as far as penetration of the entrepreneurial ecosystem in tier 2 and 3 towns and cities is concerned? It's happening. I'm not saying it's not happening. But how much push can this upcoming budget give to ensure further penetration?
I think there's a crisscross. There's a whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that is expecting the government to make business easier and to relax tax, whatever else. I think government can only be an enabler and a catalyst. And if they can just look at regulation that demystifies things and just enables and be a catalyst, that's best. Everyone complains we should have an environment for innovation. There's nothing stopping us from innovating. There is no entrepreneur who birth is salt who should be able to say that there's any policy today that's stopping us from innovation. We are a country that hasn't invested in R&D or research and development for almost 50 years in some sense. Many companies do, but they're constantly aware of the bottom line. That DNA change of us being able to make longer-term investments at an entrepreneurial level, at a corporate level, and even at the big corporate levels is actually a game shifter. So I think something where we can encourage more focus on R&D will actually every year build a very, very different base. They seem to be agreeing, but I don't know what everyone's doing about it, to be honest, because they still get back to our corporate bottom line. I think we need to have that situation where public markets and everyone needs to respect a certain amount of percentage that is going to be disciplinedly spent on R&D and actually reward companies that do that, because then you're looking at a long-term versus quarter-to-quarter. Because India can't be a quarter-to-quarter market, even in the capital markets.
Absolutely, Ronnie. That's a very interesting point that you've made with respect to R&D deployment by companies and how they can be rewarded for making those kind of investments. After all, it's a public-private partnership that needs to happen as far as R&D is concerned. But let's also talk about another pertinent point pertaining to the startup ecosystem, and that is capital deployment. We've heard startup founders over and over again, entrepreneurs over and over again on capital deployment being insufficient. And of course, if you look at the figures, well, VC funding dipped at a later stage funding aspect of startups. And especially at a time when India is more focused on, consumption-led startups, AI-led startups, deep tech startups, all of these formats, they require patient capital for that scalability to sort of happen, because scalability in some of these startups, in some of these sectors, that remains a challenge. How can that gap, especially as far as capital activity is concerned, how can that be bridged post-seed funding? How can that be bridged, especially amidst global turmoil?
I think, again, that's a myth created a little bit by the media and a little bit about people who haven't been able to raise that capital. I think we've completely missed the point that so much more domestic capital has come into the market, both in the public markets. So we've actually, over the last 3 years, become less dependent on foreign capital. That doesn't mean we don't need it. We definitely need it, but it's become less dependent. And that's a big one. See, because everyone looked at it in a very different structure. People look at his ROI, then you say a dollar is depreciating. Oh, this is a better market. So these are a little bit fair weather friends funds, whether you like it or not. And then they look hunting for tax treaties, as we've seen with some recent regulations. So India is a mature market now. I don't think you can come in here and invest and hunt for tax treaties to figure out what you want to do. So there is going to be a little bit of that churn. But the good part is domestic capital is backing domestic industries today. And I think that point cannot be missed. In fact, needs to be incentivized.
All right, so that's a rather different perspective. But Ronnie, coming back to AI, well, you've invested heavily in AI, deep tech, space technology companies as well. And when we look at India's AI policy, well, we do have the India AI mission. We're going to be holding the India AI Summit as well. For the India AI mission, over 10,000 crores worth of corpus was earmarked. And of course, we do now have 38,000 GPUs today. But whatever infrastructure deployment that you're seeing from the government side, is that sufficient? Because we're living in a day and age where there is immense competition the world over in AI being the new oil.
So I think for being innovative in AI, for being innovative in AI when it comes to healthcare, Medicare, overall care, or education, skilling, and many other sectors in innovation, I think the capital that's been raised is good and sufficient because it has to be in doses. If you overcapitalize, what people are going to be able to do is actually create a task force that's going to be there. So I think overcapitalization in a sector like this is not a good idea. The ones that are playing in the data centers, which is large, there you want to compete with the world and you want to start booking up and making data centers. So over a period of time, our data doesn't get stored overseas, which we had a challenge back 5 years and 10 years back. So I think the capital intensive part will be where we're going there. The companies that are raising money overseas are the ones that are looking at the global market. So I think the right mix of capital and discipline is actually a good thing for the AI sector because it's not going to suddenly open up other than when you're making large investments in data centers, which most entrepreneurs are not getting into. Some of the large industrial powerhouses are doing that.
All right. And when we talk about AI with sectors, are you bullish on AI within AI with sectors? Are you bullish on for the next 1 year or so, given the fact that you're also investing quite heavily in it?
Oh, I don't think we should take a 12-month view on anything when it comes to AI. We need to take a 2, 3, 4-year view. I think where the impact is going to be felt is really going to be in the care sector, in the skilling sector. And I would say when we're looking at outsourcing and whatever else. So I think the question of global, GCCs coming in here to set up, there's going to be a fair bit of disruption when it comes to that. Manufacturing will be stable. But I would say in some of the core sectors, especially healthcare, which for India is huge, right? We're one of the most underinsured. We have the less tertiary hospitals here. So I think innovation when it comes to positive part is going to be huge. It's a market we need to take and go step by step on.
Ronnie, let me also now talk to you about the edtech space, given the fact that you operate in that space. Do you foresee consolidation, further consolidation in the space? And of course, how many more companies do you expect to IPO? Because one of the companies, Physicswala, has IPO'd. How do you really see the edtech story shaping up here in India? And particularly about you and your company, would you be looking at more acquisitions? And are some companies looking attractive to you at this point in time when it comes to acquisitions?
So two things, consolidation doesn't mean everyone is to put together and be bought up. I think consolidation first means at least 60-70% of the market or the players need to shrink or go out of business. Because if you continue to consolidate only with M&As, actually that's a destructive process. So I would put that as the first portion. Second, I think overall skilling has this gravitas and has an overall aura. So I don't think everyone needs to go rushing to the public markets always because there's a lot we need to do in terms of quality, in terms of depth. And so for us, I think, at least at Upgrad, we're very focused on building what we think is there. Public markets is definitely a place where people can enjoy it and shareholders can enjoy the benefits of what we want to do at a particular scale. So I think this is a sector that requires gravitas and sensibility. It's like the medical center, and it's like hospitals and chains. There's a fair sense of responsibility as well as when you scale. And when that actually happens, that's a good opportunity. But today, I would say consolidation should not be only based on M&As. It can actually mean shrinking of the number of players so that actually the market matures with high quality, long-lasting, long-view players.
All right. So edtech requires gravitas. And of course, you're not really in favor of companies perhaps looking at IPOing or hitting on the D street. But that could happen perhaps at a mature stage. Just one final question, Ronnie, before we let you go. 3 trends that you see in the edtech space panning out over the next couple of years.
So I think, there's a strong responsibility for education in AI and AI in education.
Right.
And I think this sector needs to handle both. Most sectors won't. We need to figure out how to educate people in AI, but we can't do it. It can be carpet bombing across the board. It's going to be sequential at various levels and vary people. That's one. And how can AI actually augment overall education? And I don't mean just in the online space, because I think even conventional education and offline education today needs a lot of upgrading and a lot of disruption. It needs augmentation. I don't think we're going to be able to change curriculums. We're not going to be able to change many of those regulations because there's a good reason for they need to be there. But if 75 out of 100 people are still not getting their undergrad, We've got to be able to solve for that. And I think AI can push that to make it more easy, more concurrent, while you're actually going out and having a job.
All right. Very interesting trends, Ronnie, that you've put out as far as AI is concerned. And of course, how AI transforms the edtech sector, the education sector, not just about the quality of education, but the spread of education as well. That remains to be seen. But once again, on that note, thank you very much for taking the time out and speaking to us here on